Hey, my name is Tate Sullivan. I'm 34 years old, and I run a small event and catering setup out of a converted barn on the edge of a town in the Montana foothills. Weddings, mostly, plus the occasional anniversary party or town fundraiser. Anything that needs tables and lights and food, and a person who knows how to turn an empty space into a day people remember. It started as my mother's business, a little catering kitchen she ran out of our farmhouse, and I grew it into the barn and the full setup after she passed, because it turned out I had a knack for it, and because a person needs something to pour himself into after the people he'd have poured himself into are gone. I'm good at weddings. That's a strange thing for a man to say, maybe, but it's true. I've done hundreds of them now, and I've learned that a wedding is really just a machine for making people feel seen. The bride seen, the couple seen, the family seen, everyone in that barn seen and fed and warm for one perfect day. I build that machine, and I run it, and I stand at the back of it in a clean apron, watching other people have the best day of their lives. And then I break it all down and load it on the truck and do it again the next weekend. It's good work, honest work. It's also, I'll admit, a lonely way to spend your Saturdays. Always at the wedding, never in it, the man who makes the day happen, and then goes home alone to a quiet farmhouse while everyone else drives off into their new life. I'd made my peace with that. Mostly. There was someone once, a few years back. But the wedding business runs on weekends and holidays, and every romantic evening on the calendar, which is to say I was always working exactly when a relationship needed me not to be, and she found someone with a normal schedule, and I didn't blame her. Since then, it's been me and the barn and the long parade of other people's happiest days. And I told myself that watching other people be happy was a close enough thing to being happy yourself. It isn't, quite. But it gets you through a lot of Saturdays. The wedding that changed everything was one I was catering at a venue across the valley. Not my barn. Someone else's place. A big pretty spread with a view of the mountains, where I'd been hired just to do the food and the setup for a couple hundred guests. It was shaping up to be a beautiful one. Perfect June day, the kind you order months in advance and pray for. The flowers were in, the chairs were set, the arch was up against the mountains, and 200 guests were arriving in their summer best, and everything was exactly as it should be, right up until it wasn't, because the groom didn't come. I don't mean he was late. I mean, as the afternoon wore on past the ceremony time, and the guests shifted in their seats, and the coordinator started making frantic phone calls, word began to move through the crowd the way bad news moves, in whispers and hands over mouths, that there wasn't going to be a wedding, that the groom had sent word. And then the specific, awful detail that made it worse than a simple no-show, the detail that went through that crowd like a current. He hadn't called. He hadn't come. He'd sent the bride a text. On the morning of her wedding, with 200 guests in their seats and the mountains lit up behind the arch, the man she was supposed to marry had texted her that he couldn't do it, and then turned his phone off. I watched it happen from the catering tent, the way I watch everything at a wedding. From the edge, unseen, the man who makes the day. I watched the whispers spread. I watched the coordinator go pale. I watched 200 people slowly understand that they'd come for a celebration that wasn't going to happen, and begin the awful shuffling exodus of guests fleeing a disaster they don't want to be near. And I watched the bride, who I'd seen only in glimpses, getting ready radiant that morning, walk out of the bridal suite in her dress into the middle of it, and stand there and understand, all at once, in front of everyone, that she'd been left at the altar by a text message. Her name, I'd learn, was Emberly Rhodes, and what I remember most is that she didn't cry. Not then. She just stood there in her wedding dress in the emptying venue, with her phone in her hand, absolutely still, with the particular frozen dignity of a person absorbing a blow so public and so large that tears haven't even caught up to it yet. The venue emptied fast. That's the thing nobody tells you about a wedding that falls apart. How quickly 200 people can vanish when the day they came for turns into someone else's catastrophe. They mean well, mostly. They just don't know what to do with a disaster this size and this public. So they murmur their sympathies to no one in particular. And they file out to their cars. And within an hour, a venue that had held 200 guests held almost none. The bride's own family scattered too. Not out of cruelty, but into the frantic logistics of a canceled wedding. The phone calls, the vendors, the mother of the bride weeping in a corner, while an aunt tried to manage the fallout. Everyone suddenly with an urgent task that took them away from the one person at the center of it. Until there was almost no one left in that beautiful venue but the bride, standing alone in her dress in front of an arch against the mountains, and me in the catering tent, breaking down a feast that 200 people had fled before eating. I want to be honest about what I felt watching her, because it's the heart of this. I've been the man at the edge of hundreds of weddings. I've watched hundreds of brides have the best day of their lives while I stood in the back in a clean apron. And I had never, not once, seen anything like Emberly Rhodes standing alone in her wedding dress in an emptied venue, absorbing the most public humiliation a person can suffer with a stillness that was somehow worse than any amount of screaming would have been. And every instinct I had, the instinct of a man whose entire job is making sure people feel seen at weddings, told me that the one unforgivable thing in that moment would be to let her stand there unseen. So I did a thing I have never done in 15 years of catering other people's weddings. I stopped breaking down the feast. I picked up 2 plates and I filled them. Real food, the good food. The food 200 people had run off without eating. And I poured 2 glasses of the champagne that was never going to get its toast. And I carried it all across that empty venue to where the bride stood alone in front of the arch. And I did the most presumptuous thing a catering man can do, which is insert himself into the day. She heard me coming and turned, and up close she was younger than I'd thought, and her eyes were dry in that terrible frozen way, and she looked at me. The catering guy, the man in the apron, a stranger, with an expression that was mostly just too stunned to be anything. "I'm Tate," I said. "I did the food, which nobody ate." I set the 2 plates down on the edge of a table that hadn't been cleared yet, and the 2 glasses beside them. And I've catered a lot of weddings, and I've learned that the one thing nobody ever does at a wedding is make sure the bride actually eats. There's always too much happening, so the bride goes through the most important day of her life running on nothing. I pulled out a chair. Today's day didn't happen the way it was supposed to. I'm sorry, I truly am. But you're still standing here in the middle of it having eaten nothing, and I've got a feast that 200 people were too rattled to touch, and it seems like a crime to let all of it go to waste when there's one person here who could use a meal more than anyone I've ever met. I gestured at the chair. So sit down, eat something. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. But you shouldn't have to stand alone in this either. Can I be your plan B? She blinked. It was the first thing that had cut through the froze in stillness. My, what? Your plan B, I said. The whole day was plan A, the dress, the arch, the 200 people, the man who didn't come. Plan A fell apart, spectacularly, through absolutely no fault of yours, and everyone who came for plan A has fled the scene. I sat down in the other chair, so I wasn't looming, so it was just 2 people at a table. But there's still a beautiful evening happening, and a mountain view, and more good food than one person could eat in a week, and a guy who's got nowhere else to be. That's plan B. It's a much smaller plan. It's just dinner with a stranger in a pretty place on a day that went wrong, but it beats standing alone in front of an empty arch. So, can I be your plan B, just for the next hour? For a long moment she just looked at me. This stranger in an apron who'd carried her 2 plates of food across an empty venue. And then something in the frozen stillness cracked, not into tears, not yet, but into a short, disbelieving breath that was almost a laugh. The sound a person makes when the world has been so absurdly cruel that a small, unexpected kindness tips it over into something you can't name. "You want to be my plan B," she repeated. "For the next hour. Low stakes. No man has to show up. The only requirement is that you eat something, because I made a lot of food and you're about to fall over." I nudged a plate toward her. "The chicken's good. I'd say that even if I hadn't made it. But I did make it, so you can trust me." And Emberly Rhodes, left at the altar by text an hour before, sat down in the chair I'd pulled out, in her wedding dress, in the emptied venue with the mountains going gold behind the arch, and she picked up a fork and she ate. And I sat across from her and ate too. And for a while neither of us said much of anything, because some situations don't need talking. They just need another human being at the table so you're not alone in them. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the groom. It was, "This is really good chicken." "I told you," I said. 15 years of practice. Everybody runs off and nobody ever eats it, but it's good chicken." That got the almost law again. And then, finally, the tears. But they were better tears than the frozen stillness, the kind that move instead of the kind that lock you up. She cried for a bit, over the good chicken, in her wedding dress. And I didn't try to fix it or fill the silence. I just stayed at the table, because staying was the whole job. And then, when the worst of it had passed, she told me. His name was Grant. They'd been together 4 years. And the thing she kept circling back to, the thing that had frozen her worse than the humiliation, wasn't that he'd left. It was that some part of her had known, that there'd been signs for months, a pulling away, a coldness, 100 small moments she'd explained away because the wedding was booked and the deposits were paid and 200 people were coming and it felt too late to stop. "I think I knew," she said, staring at the arch. "I think I've known for months that he didn't want this." And I kept going anyway, because stopping felt impossible, because everyone was already coming, because I'd have had to admit I'd wasted 4 years. So I walked toward a wedding I think I knew wasn't going to happen, and I let it get all the way to 200 people in chairs before he did the stopping for me. In the most humiliating way he possibly could have. She wiped her eyes. "So I don't even get to be just heartbroken. I have to be heartbroken and humiliated and also furious at myself for not being the one brave enough to call it off first. Can I offer a different way to look at it?" I said. "You don't have to take it. Please. Any other way to look at it would be welcome right now. You didn't waste 4 years, and you weren't a coward for not calling it off," I said. "You're a person who keeps their promises. You made a commitment, and even when it got hard, even when part of you doubted, you kept walking toward the thing you'd promised, because that's who you are, someone who doesn't quit on people. That's not a flaw. That's rare. The problem was never that you kept your promise. The problem is that you made it to a man who'd break his by text message with 200 people watching." I met her eyes. "You didn't fail today. You got shown, in the clearest possible way, exactly who he was. That's an awful gift. But it is a gift because you got it today instead of 5 years and 2 kids from now. The woman who keeps her promises just got free of a man who doesn't keep his. It doesn't feel like freedom yet, but that's what it is." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at me across the table in the gold light. "Who are you?" she said finally. "You're the caterer. You're supposed to be packing up the chicken, not this." "I'm the guy at the edge of the wedding," I said. "I've been at the edge of hundreds of them. My whole job is making sure people feel seen on the biggest day of their life. And I have never once in 15 years seen someone as unseen as you were standing alone in front of that arch. So I stopped packing up the chicken. Some things matter more than the chicken." We stayed at that table until the light went from gold to blue to dark. And somewhere in there, the disaster stopped being a disaster and became just an evening. 2 people who'd met in the wreckage of a day, eating good food that would otherwise have gone to waste, talking about everything and nothing, while the mountains disappeared into the night. She told me about her work. She was a school teacher. 3rd grade. She loved it. And about how she'd ended up engaged to a man who, she was beginning to see clearly for the first time, had never really seen her either. I told her about the barn, and my mother's catering kitchen, and the strange, lonely privilege of spending your life at the edge of other people's happiest days. At one point, she looked around at the emptied venue, the abandoned chairs, the arch standing over nobody, and she said, "This was supposed to be the worst day of my life." "Is it?" I asked. She considered it honestly. "It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me," she said slowly. "But it's not the worst day. Because the worst thing happened at 2 in the afternoon, and then a stranger brought me chicken, and now it's 10 at night, and I'm somehow okay. I'm sitting in the ruins of my wedding, and I'm okay because you sat down instead of packing up." She shook her head. "I don't understand how the worst thing that ever happened to me turned into a day I'm not sure I'd give back. Because the worst thing that happened to you today wasn't really the wedding falling apart," I said. "It was finding out you were alone in it, and then you turned out not to be. That's the whole difference between a catastrophe and a hard day, whether you're alone in it. You weren't. That's all Plan B ever was. Just not alone." I helped her family get everything sorted that night. The vendors, the logistics, the 1,000 small, awful tasks of unwinding a wedding. Because it turned out I was good at exactly that, the breaking down of a day, and because I didn't want to leave until I knew she was somewhere safe with people who loved her. And when I finally did leave, I gave her my number for the practical reason of the catering invoice that no one had thought about. And I drove home to my quiet farmhouse thinking I'd probably never hear from her again, because you don't usually keep the people you meet in a disaster. But she called 3 days later. "Not about the invoice. I wanted to thank you," she said, "properly, for the chicken and the Plan B, and all of it. I've been thinking about what you said, that the difference between a catastrophe and a hard day is whether you're alone in it. It's been getting me through. So, thank you." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "I'd have done it for anyone." "I know," she said. "That's sort of why I'm calling. Because you'd have done it for anyone, which means you're just that kind of person, all the time, not just when someone's watching. And I've spent 4 years with someone who was only kind when someone was watching. So I find I want to know the kind of person who brings a stranger chicken when nobody's watching." A pause. "Would you want to get dinner sometime? A real one. Where the food isn't left over from a wedding that didn't happen." I want to tell you I said yes right away, but the truth is I hesitated because I'm a careful man, and she'd been left at the altar 3 days ago, and the last thing a woman in that situation needs is to fall out of one thing and into another before she's had time to breathe. "I'd like that," I said. "A lot, actually. But can I say something first, as the kind of person who'd do it for anyone?" I took a breath. "You got left at the altar 3 days ago. That's a wound, and it's a fresh one, and I don't want to be the thing you grab onto to keep from feeling it. So how about this? Let's get dinner. But slow. No pressure, no rebound, no rushing you out of one thing into another. Just 2 people who met in a disaster, getting to know each other at whatever pace lets you actually heal. Because if this turns into something, I want it to be something you chose on purpose, not something you fell into, because I happened to be holding a plate of chicken when your world came apart. You deserve to be chosen on purpose, and you deserve to do the choosing on purpose too." The line was quiet for a moment. "See that," she said, and her voice was thick. "That right there. Grant would never have said that. Grant would have taken the rebound and never once thought about whether it was good for me." A breath. "Okay, slow. Dinner, slow, no rushing. But Tate, I'm already choosing it on purpose. I just want you to know that. Whatever this turns out to be, I'm not falling into it. I'm walking toward it. On purpose. The way I walk toward things." So we went slow. Dinner first. A real one, at a little place in town where the food wasn't left over from anyone's disaster, and where Emberly laughed for what she told me was the first time since the wedding and where I discovered that under the humiliation and the heartbreak was a genuinely funny, sharp, warm person who'd spent 4 years being slowly dimmed by a man who only shone when someone was watching. Then more dinners, then long walks, and slow afternoons, and the careful, unhurried business of two people getting to know each other on purpose, at a pace that let a wound actually heal instead of just getting papered over. I meant what I'd said on the phone. I didn't rush her. When you spend your life at the edge of weddings, you learn that the good marriages and the disasters often look identical on the wedding day. The difference is all in the months and years of whether two people actually saw each other, or just performed a day. I didn't want to perform a day with Emberly. I wanted to actually see her, and be seen, and let whatever grew between us grow at the speed of truth instead of the speed of a rebound. There were things I learned about her in those slow months that told me more about the 4 years she'd spent with Grant than any single story could have. There was the way she apologized for wanting things. The first few dinners, I noticed she'd order whatever I ordered, or defer to whatever I suggested, and when I finally asked her one night what she actually wanted to eat, not what was easiest, not what matched mine, what she wanted, she looked genuinely stumped, like the question hadn't been put to her in years. And I understood, watching her work it out, that somewhere in 4 years she'd learned to sand down her own preferences until she wasn't sure she had them anymore. Grant, I gathered, had been the kind of man whose wants filled a room until there was no space left for anyone else's. And Emberly had adapted the way people do, by shrinking, until she genuinely couldn't tell you her own order at a restaurant. So I made a small, quiet practice of always asking, every time, what she wanted, and never once making the wanting a problem. Until slowly, over months, her preferences came back, tentative at first, and then with force, until she was arguing with me happily about which restaurant and correcting my terrible taste in movies, and ordering exactly what she wanted without checking my face first. Watching a person's wants come back to life is one of the more beautiful things I've ever been part of. There was the way she braced for disappointment. Every plan we made, some part of her held back, kept a little distance, protected herself against the possibility that I wouldn't show. Because she'd just spent 4 years with a man who'd trained her, culminating in the most spectacular no-show imaginable, that the people you count on don't always come. So I made it my business to always come. Early, if anything, reliable to the point of boring. I showed up when I said I would, every single time, not because I was performing reliability, but because I understood that for a woman who'd been left at an altar, a man simply showing up when he said he would was its own kind of vow, repeated over and over until her body could believe it. It took months. But there came a day when I watched her stop bracing, when she made a plan with me and just trusted, easily, that I'd be there, the way you trust something you've stopped having to think about. And I knew we'd crossed something. And there was the way she loved the work. I hadn't expected that. She was a school teacher, and she loved that too. But when she started coming to the weddings I catered, first just to keep me company, then actually helping, I discovered she had a real gift for the thing that is the whole secret of the job, which is making people feel seen on the biggest day of their lives. She'd notice the wallflower ant nobody was talking to and go draw her out. She'd spot the flower girl having a meltdown and diffuse it. She'd catch the groom's nervous father standing alone and make him feel like the most important man in the room. She did instinctively the thing I'd spent 15 years learning to do deliberately. And watching her do it, I understood something about why she'd frozen so completely in front of that arch. A person whose whole nature is to make others feel seen had been standing in the one moment of her life when she most needed to be seen herself, and found herself utterly alone. No wonder it broke something. And no wonder the small act of me sitting down had meant so much. It was the thing she spent her whole life giving other people, finally given back to her. One evening, a few months in, she said something I've never forgotten. We were breaking down a wedding at the barn, coiling lights in the dark after the couple had driven off into their new life. And she said, out of nowhere, "Do you ever get sad doing this? Being at the edge of everyone else's happiest day, over and over, and then going home?" "I used to," I said. "For years." I told myself watching other people be happy was a close enough thing to being happy myself. It wasn't. It was just a way of being near a thing I didn't think I got to have. And now? Now I'm coiling lights in the dark with you, I said, which is not the edge of anybody's happiest day. It's the middle of an ordinary one. And it turns out the middle of an ordinary day with the right person beats the edge of everybody else's best day by about 1,000 miles. I looked at her across the half-dark barn. "I spent 15 years at the edge, Emberly. You're the first thing that ever pulled me into the middle." She didn't say anything. She just came over and helped me coil, the last of the lights, our hands working together in the dark. And it was the most ordinary moment in the world. And I wouldn't have traded it for every spectacular wedding day I'd ever catered. And it turned out that the woman who kept her promises, once she was free of the man who'd broken his, was extraordinary. As the months went on and the wound healed, Emberly came back to life in a way that was something to witness. The dimming reversed, the warmth and the sharpness and the funny all turning back up to full. She'd walk into my barn on the weekends while I set up someone else's wedding, and she'd help, and she had a natural eye for it, for the making people feel seen that is the whole secret of the work. She started coming to every wedding I catered, not as a guest, as a partner. And the two of us at the edge of other people's happiest days turned out to be a much less lonely place than one of me had ever been. Grant surfaced once, about 6 months in. Of course he did. Men like that always circle back once they see the woman they discarded doing well without them. He'd heard, somehow, that Emberly was seeing someone, that she seemed happy, and it apparently didn't sit right with him that the woman he'd left at the altar had gone and found something better. He called her, full of a kind of retroactive regret that costs nothing to feel once someone else has done the hard work of putting a person back together. He'd made a mistake. He'd panicked. He'd been scared. Could they talk? Could they try again? And Emberly, who 6 months earlier had stood frozen and humiliated in front of an emptied arch, did not freeze this time. "Grant," she said. She told me about the call afterward, word for word, because she wanted me to hear it. "You didn't panic. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, and then you made it in the most cowardly way a person can, by text, with 200 people watching, and then you turned off your phone so you wouldn't have to hear what you'd done. That's not panic. That's who you are. And I spent 4 years not seeing it, because you only ever showed me your best when someone was watching." A pause, she said, and then the part she was proudest of. "Here's what you actually did, Grant. You left me alone in front of an arch on the worst day of my life, and a stranger who caters weddings put down what he was doing and brought me a plate of chicken and sat with me so I wouldn't be alone in it. That's the difference between you and the man I'm with now. You left me alone in the disaster. He sat down in it. I'm not coming back. I finally found someone who shows up when nobody's watching, and I'm not trading that for someone who only showed up when they were. Don't call again." And she hung up, and she told me. She stood in her kitchen shaking a little, not from fear this time, but from the sheer force of having finally said the true thing to the man who'd made her small. And then she called me, and told me the whole thing, and I understood that the woman I'd met frozen in front of an empty arch had finished thawing all the way into someone formidable. I asked her after whether any part of her had been tempted, whether Grant's call had stirred anything, some old muscle memory of the 4 years, some pullback toward the familiar. Because I wanted to know, and because I'd meant what I said about her choosing this on purpose, and choosing means it has to be possible to choose otherwise. "For about half a second," she admitted, "not because I wanted him. Because he was familiar. And familiar has a pull even when it's bad for you. For half a second, the old groove was still there. The groove 4 years wears into you, where his approval mattered and his coldness was my fault to fix. She shook her head. And then I thought about the arch. Not the leaving, the after. Standing there alone while everyone scattered, and one person putting down what he was doing and walking toward me instead of away. And I realized the half-second pull toward Grant was just habit, and the thing pulling me toward you was everything else. Every part of me that isn't just old habit. So it wasn't really a hard choice. It just had a half-second of static before the signal came through clear. That's honest, I said. Thank you for telling me the half-second was there. That matters more than if you'd said there was no pull at all. Why? Because I felt no pull would mean you never really chose. You'd just have been running from him. But I felt the pull and chose you anyway. That's a choice. That's the on-purpose thing I keep going on about. You felt the gravity of the old life, and you picked the new one with your eyes open. I meant it, all of it. That's the difference between a rebound and a decision. A rebound is running away from something. A decision is walking toward something, even though the old thing still has a little pull. You just walk toward me with your eyes open. I'll take that over no pull at all every single time. She looked at me a long moment. You know what's strange? Grant never once asked me a question like that. In 4 years, he never asked what I was tempted by, or what pulled at me, or what was hard. He didn't want to know my inside. He wanted the outside to look right. She reached over and took my hand. You keep asking about my inside, the half-second, the wanting, the bracing. Nobody's ever been that interested in the parts of me that don't show. That's the thing I couldn't have told you I was missing, because I didn't know it was a thing a person could have. Someone interested in the inside. We took a full year. I'm glad we did. A wound like the one Grant left doesn't heal on a rebound schedule, and I'd meant what I said about wanting Emberly to choose this on purpose, walking toward it rather than falling into it. So we let it take the time it took. And by the time a year had passed, what we had wasn't the fragile thing that grows in the aftermath of a disaster. It was a real, solid, chosen thing, built slow, tested against a whole year of ordinary days, which is the only test that actually matters. There was a turning point, somewhere in the middle of that year, that I think about a lot. It was a wedding I was catering. A big one, a beautiful one, everything going right. And midway through the reception, the maid of honor came and found me in the catering tent, distraught, because the bride was having a private meltdown in a back room, convinced she'd made a mistake, spiraling the way people sometimes do when the sheer size of a life decision lands on them all at once. And the coordinator was busy and the family didn't know, and someone needed to talk this bride down. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, the maid of honor came to the caterer. I didn't go. Emberly did. She was there helping that night, the way she'd started to, and she heard the whole thing, and she looked at me and said, "I've got this." And she went into that back room, and she was in there for 45 minutes. And when she came out, the bride came with her, calm, steady, ready, and the wedding went on. And it was beautiful, and nobody but the three of us ever knew how close it had come to not happening. Afterward, breaking down in the dark, I asked her what she'd said. I told her the truth, Emberly said. I told her that a year ago I stood alone in front of an arch because a man who should have shown up didn't, and that the worst thing in the world isn't marrying the wrong person. You can survive that. I'm proof. The worst thing is being alone in the moment your life changes. And then I asked her one question. I asked her whether the man out there waiting for her was the kind who'd sit down beside her in a disaster, or the kind who'd send a text and turn off his phone. And she knew the answer immediately. He's a sitter-down. She was just scared, the way everyone's scared, and she needed someone to remind her she wasn't scared because it was wrong. She was scared because it was big. Emberly coiled a string of lights, so I reminded her. The fear isn't the signal. The person is the signal. and her person was a sitter-down. So she went and married him. I stood there in the dark holding a half-folded tablecloth, and I thought, this is the woman a man left at an altar because he couldn't be bothered to show up. And now she's the one who walks into back rooms and talks frightened brides through the biggest fear of their lives, using the worst day of her own as the tool that saves theirs. The thing Grant threw away, she'd turned into a gift she could give other people. That's not recovery. That's alchemy. You know, I said, you're better at this job than I am. The real job, not the food. The making people feel seen part. You're better at it than I've gotten in 15 years. I had a good teacher, she said. A caterer brought me chicken once when my whole life fell apart. I'm just doing what he did. I proposed at the barn on an ordinary evening with no audience at all. That was deliberate. Emberly had done the big public wedding day thing once, the 200 guests and the arch and the spectacle, and it had ended in the worst public humiliation of her life. I didn't want to hand her another performance. So I asked her in the quiet, just the two of us, in the barn where she'd spent a year helping me make other people's days. No crowd, no spectacle, nothing to perform. Just a man asking a woman a real question and a woman giving a real answer. I know you did the big version once, I said, and it went about as wrong as it could go. So I'm not asking you for a big version. I'm asking you for the true version. No arch, no 200 people, no spectacle you have to walk toward whether it's right or not. Just, will you marry me? Slow and small and chosen on purpose, the way we've done everything. I held out the ring. You were somebody's plan A once, and he ran. I'd rather be your plan B forever than anyone's plan A for a day. Because plan B was never the smaller plan. It was just the real one. Emberly, who does not freeze anymore, did not freeze. She laughed. And she cried, the good kind of both. And she said yes before I'd finished. And then she said the thing I'll carry the rest of my life. You keep calling yourself my plan B, she said. But you were never the backup plan, Tate. You were the first person who ever actually showed up. Everyone else, Grant, the 200 guests, even my own family that day. They all had somewhere else to be the second it got hard. You were the only one who sat down. That's not a plan B. That's the only plan that was ever real. Everything before you was just the plan I thought I was supposed to want. You're the one I actually do. We married at the barn the next fall. Small 30 people, the ones who actually mattered. No spectacle, no arch against the mountains, just a warm room full of people who'd shown up and meant it. I catered it myself, of course, because I couldn't not. And the chicken was very good, and this time, for the first time at any wedding I'd ever been part of, I wasn't at the edge of it in a clean apron watching someone else have the best day of their life. I was in the middle of it, finally, having the best day of mine. In what passed for my vows, I told her the truth, which is all I'd ever served her. I've spent 15 years at the edge of other people's weddings, I said, making sure everybody felt seen, and then going home alone. And then one day, I watched a woman stand alone in front of an arch, after the worst thing a person can do to another person. And every instinct I had said the one unforgivable thing would be to let her stand there unseen. I had to stop a second. So I brought you chicken, and I asked to be your plan B. And here's my vow, Emberly. I will show up. When it's easy and when it's hard. When someone's watching and when nobody is. On the best days and the days the plan falls apart. I will sit down in it with you every single time. You spent 4 years with a man who only showed up for the audience. You will spend the rest of your life with one who shows up for you. That's the whole vow. I'll always sit down. Emberly, in hers, said, a man left me alone in front of an arch by text message, in front of 200 people, on the day I thought was going to be the best of my life. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. She smiled through the tears. And then the caterer put down what he was doing and brought me a plate of chicken and asked to be my plan B, and sat with me until the worst day of my life turned into the day I met the person I was actually supposed to find. I don't want the plan A I thought I was supposed to want. I spent 4 years walking toward it, and it left me at an altar. I want the plan B that turned out to be the only real plan there ever was. I want the man who sits down. I want you. These days, the barn does better than it ever has. Because it turns out two people who both instinctively make others feel seen are twice as good at running a wedding as one. Emberly kept teaching 3rd grade. She loves those kids. She'll never give them up. But on the weekends, she's my partner in the truest sense, at the edge of other people's happiest days, except neither of us is lonely at the edge anymore, because we're at it together. We've gotten a reputation, the two of us, as the wedding people who actually care, who notice the lonely aunt and the nervous father and the flower girl melting down, who make sure the bride actually eats, who treat every couple's day like it matters because it does. Business has doubled. But that's not the part that matters. The part that matters is that I spent 15 years alone at the edge of love, and now I've got someone standing there beside me. And the edge turned out to be a fine place to be, as long as you're not there by yourself. And every so often, more often than you'd think, we cater a wedding for a couple where one of them got left before, jilted or divorced or heartbroken by someone who didn't show up. Emberly can always spot them, the ones carrying an old wound into a new day. And she always finds a moment quietly to tell them her version of the story. The arch, the text, the 200 people, the caterer with the chicken. Not to make it about herself, to make it about them. To tell them, from the far side of the exact thing they're afraid of, that getting left by the wrong person is sometimes just the painful clearing out that makes room for the right one to sit down. She's talked more scared, wounded people into believing in love again than any wedding I've ever catered. She uses the worst day of her life as a lamp for other people's darkest moments. I've never seen anything like it. We kept the arch, if you can believe it. Not the actual one from that venue, but I built her one, at the barn, from the same kind of wood, and we stood under it to say our vows because Emberly said she didn't want the arch to be a thing she was afraid of for the rest of her life, a symbol of the day she got left. She wanted to take it back. So we got married under an arch on purpose, the two of us and 30 people who'd shown up. And now that arch stands at the barn where I set up other people's weddings. And every time I build a day for another couple, it's there, the arch she wasn't left under, the one that got its wedding after all. People ask how we met. Emberly tells them the truth, even the hard parts, because she's done being ashamed of them. I got left at the altar by text message, in front of 200 people, she says. The groom didn't even call. He sent a text and turned off his phone. And everyone left. The guests, my family, everyone scattered. And I stood alone in my wedding dress in front of the arch. And I have never felt so unseen in my life. And then she always adds the part that matters. And the caterer. The man who'd made food for 200 people who all ran off without eating it. He put down what he was doing and brought me 2 plates, and sat down across from me and asked if he could be my plan B. I thought my life ended at that arch. It turned out it started there. I just had to get left by the wrong man, so the right one could sit down. I think about that first afternoon a lot, in the quiet mornings before Emberly's up, when I'm prepping for whatever wedding we've got that weekend. I think about how close I came to not doing it, how the sensible thing, the professional thing, was to keep breaking down the feast and let the coordinator handle the human wreckage, because the human wreckage isn't the caterer's job. The caterer's job is the food. You stay in your lane. You don't insert yourself into the worst moment of a stranger's life uninvited. Every rule of the work I'd done for 15 years said, keep packing the chicken. Mind your business. The bride's got family for that. And I think about how all those rules were wrong, that one time the way rules sometimes are. Because the family scattered. The coordinator was drowning. And there was exactly one person left in that emptied venue who could have walked across the room and sat down. And it was the man in the apron everyone had stopped seeing hours ago. If I'd stayed in my lane, she'd have stood alone in front of that arch until someone finally remembered her, and the story of her life would have a hole in it where the worst day just stayed the worst day. Instead, I broke the rule. I carried 2 plates across an empty room, and the worst day of her life turned into the day we both got found. That's the thing I'd tell anyone who spends their life at the edge of other people's happiness, mistaking the edge for their assigned place. The rules that keep you at the edge: stay in your lane, mind your business, it's not your job, you're just the help. Those rules are real most of the time. And then every so often they're exactly wrong, and the whole rest of your life is on the far side of breaking them. You just have to be paying enough attention to know which time is which. I almost wasn't. I almost kept packing the chicken. I will be grateful until the day I die that I looked up and saw a woman standing unseen in front of an arch and put the chicken down. I'd spent 15 years believing the most a man like me got was the edge of other people's happiest days, that I was the one who built the machine that made people feel seen and stood at the back of it in a clean apron, and went home alone while everyone else drove off into their new life. A woman left alone in front of an arch taught me otherwise, because the job was never really about the food or the tables or the lights. It was about the one thing I'd been doing at the edge of every wedding for 15 years without ever getting to do it for myself. Making sure someone doesn't have to be alone on the day their life changes. I'd done it for hundreds of strangers. And then one June afternoon, the person who needed it most was standing right in front of me, unseen in a wedding dress, and I finally stepped out of the edge and into the middle and did the thing I'd been built to do. Not for the audience, not for the day, but for her. People come to the barn now and they see the arch, the one I built her, the one we got married under. And sometimes a couple will ask about it, and if it's Emberly telling the story, she'll tell them the whole thing, the text and the 200 people and the caterer, with the chicken. And there's always a moment where whoever's listening looks a little stricken on her behalf. The reflexive sympathy people offer a person who got left at an altar. And Emberly always waves it off, gently, with the thing she's come to believe all the way down. Don't be sorry. Getting left was the best thing that ever happened to me. I just couldn't see it for about an hour, until a man put down what he was doing and sat down beside me. The leaving cleared out the wrong thing. The sitting down was the right thing arriving. You don't get the second without the first. So don't be sorry I got left. Be glad somebody sat down. And every time she says it, I think about the 15 years I spent at the edge, and the 2 plates of chicken, and the woman standing unseen in front of an arch, and I understand that the whole long, lonely stretch of my life, all those Saturdays, watching other people's happiest days from the back of the room, was really just the training. 15 years of learning, deliberately, how to make a stranger feel seen on the day their life changes, so that when the one who mattered was finally standing right in front of me, unseen in a wedding dress, I'd know exactly what to do. I'd know to put down the chicken. I'd know to carry 2 plates across an empty room. I'd know to sit down and stay. "Can I be your plan B?" I asked her, holding 2 plates of chicken nobody else would eat. The first anniversary of the wedding that didn't happen fell in June, of course, and I watched Emberly get quiet as it approached. The body remembers dates even when the mind would rather not. So I didn't let it pass unmarked. I closed the barn that Saturday, no wedding booked, and I made the same meal I'd made that first afternoon, the chicken and the champagne that never got its toast, and I set 2 places at a table in the middle of the barn, under the arch I'd built her, and I told her we were going to take the date back the same way we'd taken the arch back. On purpose, together, so it stopped being a wound and became just a day we chose to spend well. She cried a little when she understood what I'd done, and then we ate the same meal, at the same kind of table, a year to the day after a stranger first carried it across an empty room to her. Except this time nobody had left, nobody had scattered, and the man across the table wasn't a stranger anymore. "You turned the worst day of my life into an anniversary," she said. "Not of the leaving, of the sitting down. And every June since, that's what we do. We close the barn, and we eat the chicken, and we celebrate not the day I lost a groom," she says, "but the day I found the one who stays." She said yes, and it turned out Plan B was never the backup, never the smaller plan, never the consolation prize. It was just the first plan that was ever real, the one where somebody actually sits down. I'd spent my whole life setting the table for other people's love stories. I'm just grateful that when the right one finally came, all I had to do was carry 2 plates across an empty room and sit down and stay.